Preparing to live stream the meeting.
It's live.
Yeah.
It
So
says,
Holmes, I just
okay, to live stream the meeting.
Yeah, you need to close the YouTube video that's open on your window.
Close it. Got it.
You
All
got
right,
it?
I think so.
Yeah, I don't hear a
Yep,
repeat.
yes, we are live streaming. We are live streaming. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Delegate Holmes, I just would know you only have 4 members of the subcommittee here at this time.
Thank you, Matt, for keeping me straight. Tough job, Matthew, but someone's got to do it.
Hmm?
Okay.
Here comes Naraki. Admit all. I clicked it already. Come on now. There he's coming in, and Healy is coming in as well. I think with those two, I might have a.
Yeah, you have 7 with those 2.
Okay.
Okay, and also I'm gonna get off because I can't be the co-host. You need to make Matt the co-host, so you can't have 2 co-hosts.
Let me do that right now.
Do the 3 dot thing, yeah.
3 dots, make co-host. Make Matt Minkler the co-host, yes. Thank you. All right. Oh, Ann Healy is still trying to get in. You click her in. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now 6:47. And I want to welcome all of you to the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee meeting. And we have several bills to discuss. All of you have received the email on the bills that we're going to be talking about. And I want to give you, first up, I'm going to tell you that HB 331 is not going to be discussed this evening because we are still waiting on amendments for that one. So if you are here for HB 331, as the chair of the committee would say to you, you are free to go. And I want to explain to you all the order in which these bills are going to be heard. HB 98 is going to be number 1. HB 151. I'm sorry, HB 452 will be number 2. HB 462 will be number 3. HB 534 will be number 4. HB 151 will be number 5, and HB 105 will be the final bill this evening, number 6. Okay, so that is going to be the order of the bills that we're going to be discussing. HB 98 HB 98 is a bill discussing condominiums and a declaration of mandatory insurance coverage. Matthew, if you could start the discussion and giving us an overview of this bill, if you could, Matthew.
Certainly. So, as mentioned, HB 98 deals with declarations of mandatory insurance coverage and alterations to those requirements. So the bill specifies that mandatory property insurance for condominiums, as required by existing provisions, must generally cover for attached, like a townhome community or your traditional high-rise multifamily building, the common elements and the units. And then in this scenario that was discussed in the bill hearing, these detached condominium units, the insurance coverage would just be for the common elements only. And the bill makes other alterations to the requirements regarding mandatory insurance for condominiums, and also would exempt detached condominium units from a certain requirement to include specific information in a condominium declaration. You all should have received an amendment on this bill. It was a sponsor amendment, which I will bring up right now, or at least I'll bring the reprint up now. But the amendment number is 98-703-124-1. And this amendment would simply require owners of detached units to carry.
Matthew, we don't see the amendment.
So I have the reprint up right now. Can you see the?
Oh, okay,
reprint?
okay, got you. Just, thank you. I got you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The amendment would be.
It's the bill with the amendment in it. I got you. Understand. Now I got you. Okay.
Apologize for the scrolling. It would
Mr.
be to
Chair?
add.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Matt. Delegate Lehman is trying to get let in.
I don't see her.
Or she may need a new meeting link is what she's saying, either or.
I see. 1 second, I can forward her that link. So generally
I'll send her the link.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll follow up on this when Delegate Lehman joins, but generally the amendment simply requires the owners of a detached unit to carry homeowners insurance for the entirety of their unit. This is to cover the gap where certain portions of the unit wouldn't be covered because there is no requirement to have general coverage on the unit itself by the effect of this bill. There's another amendment I'd like to discuss, or just almost a correction to the bill, but I'll wait until Delegate Lehman's in the meeting.
Well, I'd rather do it. I mean, that's nice of you, but I'd.
Hi, can you,
But does anybody have a question on the specific amendment that I sent out earlier from Delegate Ahrens, the sponsor amendment?
And again, ladies and gentlemen, the amendment just makes certain that the residential, that the people moving into these units have homeowners insurance. That's the crux of the amendment. Am I correct, Matthew?
Correct, yes.
Is there any additional discussion or concerns about this particular amendment? All right. You want to talk about the other amendment, Matthew?
Certainly. So I'll just work off of the reprint document because you can see it here. So under current law, there is a requirement to include in the description of the common elements certain improvements, and that requirement rests on whether those improvements are shared by or serve more than one unit or serve any portion of the common elements. The bill as drafted would exempt wholly a detached condominium unit from this provision, and this is the language that would do it. Now, some of these things in this detached environment make sense, like roofs, foundations, external supporting walls. These things shouldn't necessarily be shared by the detached units. However, if improvements are not shared or served by more than one detached condominium unit, then there wouldn't be a duty anyway under current law to include the improvements in the description in the declaration. And if there were improvements located on some common element, like, for example, some electrical improvements, you know, it could be a number of things, then there doesn't really seem to be a reason why those shouldn't be included in the declaration if they are being shared and for the benefit of all these detached units. So the recommended amendment would just be to strike this particular language here. It seems like maybe there was a good intention of including it because it might have, you know, it may not be relevant in this context, but I think that the existing law already accounts for situations where these items are not shared amongst the units or affect the units. And I reached out to CAI and there was some support for that. I believe there is an individual from CAI on the call who might be able to elaborate a little bit more on this.
No, they're comfortable, Matt.
Okay.
I know that she spoke with Scott.
Let me get Delegate Boyce. I see her hand is raised. Delegate Boyce?
Thank you. And just so Matt and Mr. Chair, so I understand, while they're detached condominiums and while there
Yes.
are common elements like the pool or the tennis courts or the gym, that wouldn't be explicitly noted. It is assumed that those are a common element.
Well, this is kind of what this language gets to, is listing these items in the declaration. So if you think about it as, you know, your traditional high-rise building, the roof,
Sure.
it's going to affect all those units because it's part of the single building. The structural components of the building are going to affect all the units.
Got
You
it.
would list that, but here you're talking about effectively single-family homes, just subject to the
Sure.
condominium fee.
Oh, understood, but there is, to a degree, that there are common elements, and would those elements be mentioned? Like, for instance, like I said, the pool, the whatever, a garage, or whatever that common element is for that kind of unit.
So to the extent that these improvements are shared by or serve any portion of the common elements in the declaration, yes, there would be a
Yes.
requirement to include them if the language here, a detached condominium unit, or was stricken from the bill.
So Matthews, let's make sure we answer your question first, Delegate
Sure.
Boyce. The answer to your question, Delegate Boyce, is yes. Those kinds of items are common elements, and they would be listed,
Okay,
okay?
but not
Oh.
for this provision. It's because we're talking about something else. You know, I'm just gonna be quiet. I'm just-
Matthew, your suggested amendment would be specific, okay, if you can highlight, since you are a co-host, if you would
Would be to
highlight what you're
Strike
suggesting,
that.
okay? So Matthew's suggestion as a second amendment would be to strike the highlighted language that you see there. The language that is suggested to be stricken is a detached condominium unit or. That is the suggested language. And as Matthew suggested, he has reached out to CAI, and it doesn't appear to be any opposition to the striking of this language. I'm going to open up the floor to anyone else, now stakeholders, if anyone has a discussion that they'd like to add into the discussion about this amendment or the other amendment. Hearing none, what I'd like to do, ladies and gentlemen, we have two amendments before us. I'd like to take both of them in a single motion. I move to accept both of the amendments. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you so very much. Any additional discussion on these two amendments? Hearing none. Anyone in opposition of these amendments, raise your hand or say no, or do something to let me know that you're in opposition of these two amendments. Matthew, if you could remove your shared screen so I can see all the participants to make sure I don't miss any hands if they pop up. Thank you, sir. If there's any opposition to the two amendments, let me know in some methodology, raise your hand digitally or physically. Tough to get out those big words. Seeing no opposition, the amendment's passed. Can I have a motion to move the bill as amended, please?
Move the bill as amended, Mr. Chair.
Is there a second? Thank you, Delegate Allen. We have the bill before us. With the motion moved and seconded with the amendments. If there's any opposition to the bill as amended, raise your hand either digitally or physically. Seeing no opposition to the bill, the HB 98 will receive a favorable recommendation unanimously from the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will now go to HB 452. And Matthew, if you would give us a general highlight on HB 452, that
Is a
would be
trail.
great.
Certainly. So
Thanks, Matt.
for HB 425,
And 425, I'm sorry, Matthew, yes.
no problem. The bill would make various changes to the requirements for land installment contracts, including those relating to title searches, required inclusions for contracts, and the applicable threshold for when a purchaser may demand a grant of the property subject to a specified condition. It would require a land installment contract to be duly signed and acknowledged by all parties and include the date on which each party signed the instrument and contain terms to which the party agrees. Requires delivery of the results of a title search to the purchaser in addition to the instrument, and requires the title search to be performed by a qualified disinterested party at the vendor's expense. And I'd also note that there are throughout many changes that would appear to be substantive but are in fact technical, or they're meant to redraft provisions of the bill in the current style of the Department of Legislative Services. Most commonly, you'll see things where the gendered he or him was used, and it's actually helping to clarify the bill a bit by specifying where it would mean vendor or purchaser in this context.
Let me do a general discussion on this particular bill, ladies and gentlemen, just so everyone has a thorough understanding of the intent of this bill. I'm sorry, Matthew, are there any amendments on this particular legislation first?
There were no amendments that were submitted by sponsor or individual members. There was one amendment that was recommended by the Office of the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division.
Yes.
And I apologize for scrolling, but it's just easier for me to show you the language that would be brought back in. Right here, this would be a provision that's required to be included with the instrument. In current law, a disclosure with respect to the 6-month period prior to the date of purchase of every transfer of title, the sale price of each transfer, and substantiated cost of vendor repairs or improvements would be included with these instruments. I believe the reason this language was repealed from current law was because of the new requirement to provide a title search. However, a title search doesn't really get to this issue of sale price of each transfer or.
And hang on one second there, Matthew. The new language that Matthew is talking about is items lines 4 through 7. Keep going, Matthew.
Yeah, and there's another provision that specifically requires not just an attestation of the title transfer,
Right.
but actually providing the title transfer, and I can show that to the members as well. But
continue. I didn't mean to distract you, but continue, Matthew. You would.
Sure. So the sale price for each transfer and the substantiated costs to the vendor for repairs or improvements would not be included in a title transfer or title search.
Yeah.
So there would at least be, my understanding of the amendment then is that there would at least be a request to pull that language back in so that those disclosures are made. And there are representatives of the Consumer Protection Division here who might be able to address the why or the need or why that language should be brought back in. Those disclosures should be made if the subcommittee would like to hear from them.
Yes, indeed. I'd like to, Jelly Boyce.
I was just agreeing that I would love to hear more from them.
Oh, fantastic. Great minds think alike. If we could have the Attorney General's staff or a member come on board to have this discussion, I'd appreciate it. Whom do we have here? I can't see all the list here, Matthew.
I believe I saw Kara Wilpone-Welburn as well as Karen Strawn on the call.
If either of your, hello?
Yeah, good evening, delegates. This is
There you are.
Wellborn. Hi.
Yes, indeed.
So I think Matt laid out what our proposed amendment is, which is keeping in the subtotal of what is in the current law as subparagraph 4, because we're concerned with vendors who purchase properties low and put in a little amount of work into the property and then encourage and maybe deceive potential purchasers into entering into these contracts at an elevated level that doesn't actually substantiate the value of the home. These contracts are traditionally conducted outside of traditional financing. So there's not an appraisal, there's not an independent third party that understands or is valuing the property at what would be market level. And so we're worried that removing these important consumer protections, which are already codified in the law, undermines the other consumer protections that are being added through this proposed legislation.
I appreciate that, and I agree with you as well. Matthew, for clarity, if you would, since you have co-host abilities, lines 1 through 3 is going to be, some of that is going to stay. I think the easiest thing to do, Matthew, would be to highlight what is going to stay in the bill, as opposed to right now, it eliminates all of lines 1 through 3. That'd be the easiest way to do it, Matthew?
Sure. So really, it would be this disclosure piece here with respect to the 6-month period prior to date of purchase, and then from the sale price of each transfer down through the semicolon, because every transfer of title of the property would be included in the title search. Alternatively, for simplicity's sake, that language about every transfer of title of the property within the 6-month period could be included, and the title search alone would likely be sufficient to prove that, to show that. It's really the things that are outside of the title search that must remain in, which is what's highlighted now to accomplish the goal suggested by the Attorney General's office.
So what you have highlighted now is the language that will stay in the bill. Is that correct, Matthew?
Plus a portion of the lead. What easiest way is what's highlighted now
You're right.
is
right.
what would need to be removed.
Taken out.
And then you would be left with everything that's not
Right.
highlighted.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Matthew, for flipping it and doing it the other way. That makes it even easier. So just to make sure everyone is clear, what is highlighted now will be removed from the language, and the rest of it, the amendment is that the rest of it would remain into current language. Is everyone clear on what I'm saying? I'm hoping. Delegate Boyce.
Okay, so what we're keeping or putting back is a disclosure with respect to 6-month period prior to the date of purchase, the sale price of each transfer and the
Sustained cost.
to the vendor of repairs or improvements. That's what we're keeping.
Yes, ma'am, you are correct.
There would probably need to be some more artful drafting than just excising
Yes.
this language here, but
But the gist.
effectively, yes. And then there would also need to be a renumbering of the section, which
Yeah,
is
so a technical,
That is correct.
thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Boyce. Any additional questions on that amendment, ladies and gentlemen? And as indicated, there will be some technical revisions necessary, but I'm hopeful that everyone understands where we're going with. If I make a motion to accept that amendment, is there a second?
Second,
Is additional discussion on the amendment? Hearing none. All in favor of the amendment, all in opposition of the amendment, say aye or raise your hand. Seeing no opposition to the amendment passes. I'd like to move the bill as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the bill as amended? Hearing none. Any opposition to moving HB 425 as amended? If there's any opposition, raise your hand either physically or digitally. Let me see that. Seeing no opposition, HB 425 as amended, we'll get a favorable report from Housing Real Property Subcommittee to the full committee. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let us now move on to House Bill 462. And Matthew, if you could please give us a brief overview on HB 462. 2.
Certainly.
Sorry, Delegate Long?
Mr. Chair, are we going in order? I'm sorry to
Oh,
ask.
no,
this question.
no, no.
Okay.
Let me give you the order of the bills again. The order of the bills were and is as follows. Number 1 is HB 98. Number 2, HB 425. Number 3, HB 462. Number 4, HB 534. Number 5, HB 151. And number 6, HB 105.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. We are now on HB 462, which is the third bill of the evening. And Matthew, if you could discuss this bill, which has sponsored by 2 glowing members of this committee. So if you give us the brief description on this one, Matthew, it certainly would be appreciated.
Sure. So HB 462 would alter the dispute settlement mechanism under the Maryland Cooperative Housing Corporation Act and make other technical and clarifying changes. The bill would apply prospectively to new disputes after the effective date of the bill. So under current law, there's a requirement to schedule a hearing, but if a member does not request a hearing under the revised language within the time frame that's specified to request a hearing, the governing body at the next meeting would be able to deliberate as to whether the violation occurred and decide whether a sanction is appropriate for the violation. I would note that a similar version of this bill was passed out of the committee and out of the House last year by a vote of 132 to 0. But while I say similar, there's one particular provision of that bill that would have dealt with failure to pay dispute settlements where there's a failure to pay assessment, and repealing a certain provision, settlement mechanism that would be applicable after the mortgage is paid off on the property. And that language is in Corporations and Associations Article 5, Section 5(6)(b)(31). This bill doesn't do that. It doesn't affect that area of law. That would remain the same dispute settlement mechanism after the mortgage is paid off. But because of that, there is another, I guess you could call it a technical amendment that I'd like to suggest for the subcommittee, having to deal with language, well, this specific language right here on page 1 of the bill. This except as provided in paragraph 2 language, and then the new paragraph 2. That appears to me to be a holdover from when that provision repealing section 5(6)(b)(31) was originally in the bill, and now would not be necessary. There would clearly be another dispute settlement mechanism for failure to pay assessments once a mortgage is paid off, and then the current process when there is a mortgage would be a failure to pay rent action. And I can go into the details of why there's a difference, but it's not really germane to the bills on hand. So the amendment would be to strike this lead in here and the new paragraph 2. The date here is still required due to the effect of the bill and making it apply prospectively.
Delegate Healy, can
Yes.
you, thank you, Delegate Healy. Are you understanding or having concerns with the suggested revision or amendment, Delegate Healy?
I would like to check with Lisa and see if it's
Perfect.
okay with them.
Okay, that would be great. That being the case, then.
I don't know.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I just want to make sure because this new language came from them and I want to make sure that they're okay with it.
Yeah, I don't know if Kathleen Elmore joined, but can I see if, do you guys want to move on to another bill and I can see very quickly, I can call her and see if she's okay, so I don't hold up the vote.
Okay, what we'll do then is we'll push this bill to the end of the calendar. And Lisa, do you understand exactly what is being suggested?
Sure.
Okay, great.
If Matt can send it to me very quickly so I can make sure I'm sending them the right reprint.
I'm not sure he can do that if he's going to be
That's
So-
okay. I'll figure it out.
So,
Got it.
so Lisa, just to clarify, there is no reprint of the bill, there is no amendment.
No.
But this information was included in the email I had sent to you and Grayson last night.
Then, okay, I got it. Let me double check.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the Housing Real Property Subcommittee, we're going to take HB 462 and place it at the end of the calendar, okay?
Yep.
Right,
Right.
now,
Thank you.
we're going to go, oh, wait a minute. Now we're going to go to, oh, where is my list?
534 is the next. one.
Okay,
Oh, I'm
they're
sorry,
good. They're good.
they're good? Okay.
All right, they're good,
Uh,
I'm good. Let's do it.
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, let's get back to HB 462. Now that we have seen the amendment, the technical amendment that was suggested by our council and stakeholders and our primary sponsor are fine with the amendment, I would like to offer a motion of favorable on the amendment. Do I have a second?
Second.
Please? Seconded by the sponsor of the bill. Any additional discussion on the amendment on HB 462? Hearing none, anyone in opposition of the amendment on HB 462, please raise your hand digitally or physically or voice your opposition to the amendment on HB 462. Hearing no opposition, the amendment passes. I make a motion to move favorable on HB 462 as amended. Is there a second?
Second,
Seconded by the primary sponsor. Any additional discussion on the bill as on HB 462 as amended? Hearing no discussion. Anyone in opposition of HB 462 as amended, either raise your hand digitally, physically, or voice your opposition to favorable with amendment on HB 462. Hearing none, HB 462 will receive a favorable report from the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee to the full committee unanimously. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will now go to HB 534. HB 534. And HB 534. All right. This bill has a fantastic sponsor on it. HB 534. Matthew, if you could give us a little bit of information on this bill, HB 534, that would be appreciated.
Sure. So the bill HB 534 deals with reserve accounts for common ownership communities. This is an issue that the subcommittee has been dealing with on several bills for the last couple of years. The specific changes here, and this would apply to any common ownership communities, or including cooperative housing corporations, condominiums, and homeowners associations. It would require that specified funds for the reserve account of a common ownership community would be deposited on or before the last day of each fiscal year. And for the members who were here in the prior year may recall that there was a 3-year period after an initial reserve study to fund the reserve account, to kind of get up to speed with the appropriate funding level. This bill would then extend that period out to 5 years. Instead of 3 years, we go 5 years. So that's right in line with basically the length of the first reserve study. Because as the members who were here in the prior year may recall, these reserve studies are updated every 5 years. So after your initial one, 5 years later, you have an updated study, and then 5 years after that, another update, and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Matthew. And that's
Oh, and I'm sorry, there's one more change. For condominiums and homeowners associations, there's a requirement to review the reserve study annually for accuracy.
correct.
But that's not an updated study. That's not requiring, detailed review. It's just a review by the board of directors.
But
making sure
reviewed by the
everything's being
board, right?
consistent.
So they can go over the books annually to make sure that, just to go over the books. And what we did here was, as Matthew indicated, we're trying to make some consistency in the bill. And the consistency is the time frame, which is 5 years. 5 years from the initial, 5 years from the unit, the common ownership community unit being established, 5 years from there. And then every 5 years, have an update. So we're making the 5 year mark as a consistency throughout the language. And the primary focus of this language, as I indicated at the bill hearing, was apparently I didn't listen to my grandfather when I was growing up well enough, where he told me I had to be more specific with my specificity, because I wrote the bill in terms of reserve studies, and I said the reserve studies have to be prepared, but I wasn't specific enough to say you have to put the money in the bank. So that's what this does. And there are no, currently, Matthew, there are no amendments to this, to HB 534. Is that correct?
There are no amendments on the bill that have been offered.
What I'd like to do, ladies and gentlemen, is open up for discussion HB 534 in case anyone has anything that they'd like to say about the bill, HB 534. Hearing no discussion, I'd like to move favorable on HB 534. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any additional discussion on HB 534? Hearing none, would anyone in opposition to HB 534 with no amendments, either raise your hand digitally, physically, or let me hear your voice in opposition of HB 534. Hearing no opposition, HB 534 will receive unanimous letter of support from Housing Real Property Subcommittee to the full E&T Committee immediately. We will now go to HB 151. HB 151. And Matthew, wait a minute, I'm sorry. Did I skip one? No,
Nope.
we did not. We're good. HB 151, Matthew, if you would go through and give us a brief overview of HB 151, I'd appreciate it, Matthew.
Sure. So HB 151 generally would require a landlord to notify a tenant in writing or of a rent increase. I am not going to go into specifically what the bill did as introduced, because the sponsor amendment effectively becomes the bill and makes significant changes. So I'll just speak from the reprint, and you're going to be looking for HB 151-553-528-1. I also have it up on the screen here. So because the amendments are the bill would now require a landlord to notify a tenant of any rent increase, regardless of the amount, before increasing the tenant's rent. The notice would have to be provided to a tenant by first-class mail with a certificate of mailing, and on timelines consistent with the timelines for notice to terminate a tenancy under 842 of the Real Property article. That's those notice to quit provisions. The duty would apply to a residential lease only and would not apply to a landlord who has provided written notice of the intent to terminate. So it's either you are providing notice that the tenancy will, the way I read it is, you're either providing notice that the tenancy will end or it will continue. And if there's a rent increase, this is the amount. And then the language would not affect or supersede any local law or ordinance that requires additional notice or that would provide additional tenant protections. So that is, it's in effect the bill as amended. I'm happy to go to any particular part of the bill or further explain what the bill is.
Let me explain something on this particular bill, ladies and gentlemen, because the amendments are extensive. Today is a discussion on HB 151. We're not going to vote on HB 151 because it is significantly amended. But I wanted to have the discussion now so that so you can have it in mind, and then once you get the amendments and read through them, you'll be able to understand them. So we're not going to vote on it. This is clearly for discussion. Delegate Long.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quickly, does it also make sure that it brings a notice of rent increase in line with existing notice of non-renewal of lease standards? I believe I heard Matt say that, but I want to be sure I didn't miss that. A 90-day notice for tenancies more than 1 month, a 60-day notice for tenancies more than 1 week, but not more than 1 month, and then at least 7 days in advance of the rent increase if parties have written lease or at least 21 days without written lease.
Very, very good question, Delegate Long.
And
Matthew, go ahead.
And that I have that language up on the screen. Yes. So my understanding or what
I'm
what I
so
see
sorry.
with these, but no, that's fine.
That's good.
To
You're
answer your
good.
question,
You're good.
To answer the question, yes, I believe that was the sponsor's intent as to mirror those provisions in 8402. So your year-long leases would be 90 days, month to month, 60, and then the week-to-week tenancies would depend on the whether or not there's a written lease.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't mean to duplicate work.
No, you're good, because that was the exact same question that I had asked. So I had already asked the question. That's why I knew the answer. Very good question, Delegate Long. Delegate Healy.
Yeah, along the same lines, I need a little clarification about the whether how those two things work together. If they decide, for instance, if somebody decides that this rent increase is too much and I'm going to move, does that interfere? Is it added onto the notice time for that or subtracted from? Or does it affect it at all, is I guess the question.
So this is aligning with the landlord's duties of notice to the tenant to quit if a landlord were to. So I don't really want to get too far into 8402 and the requirements of 8402, but in that instance, if a landlord were to say for a year-long lease were to want to terminate that, they'd be required to provide 90 days notice. So this is just assuming, because there's a rent increase, that they won't also terminate. You're providing the same level of notice, a comparable notice.
So
90
it's
days.
either or, it's not both.
Right. So that goes to my reading of A2, the paragraph 2 in subsection A, where this wouldn't apply to a landlord who's provided written notice of the intent to terminate a tenancy. Because
Okay. But the other side of it is, does the tenant have a time limit as well to give notice to the landlord? If they decide, oh, you're raising my rent and I can't afford it and I'm gonna move, how much time is there a notice requirement in that direction where the tenant has to let the landlord know that they're vacating?
there certainly can be one listed in a lease, and I believe there is one in law. I'm unfortunately drawing a blank as to what the legal provision might be.
Okay, well, when we take this up again, we'll talk about
Right.
that. That's fine.
I'll make a note to verify.
And I have to admit also, and I think I'm drawing a blank too, in terms of that specific question. Very good question, Delegate Healy. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any additional questions from the members of the Housing Real Property Subcommittee? Yes, sir, Delegate Noricki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just going through testimony from several of the different affected groups here potentially. A lot of them are suggesting a 60-day time period. Just wondering, if, Matt, what your thoughts are about that. Maybe why 60 days versus 90 days, that sort of thing there.
Delegate Naraki, I hate to punt, but that is more of a policy question that is outside of my role for the committee.
That's fair.
Let me see if I can put some parameters around it. Very good question, though, sir. The parameters that I want to put around it is that what you see here is current language in other parts of statute, which is why we're mirroring this.
Okay, that helps put parameters around it for Mr. Chair. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
we're trying to. As much as possible throughout the term that I've been dealing with common ownership community and things, I've been desperately trying to keep condos and HOAs as similar in language as possible. It's a Herculean task. That's what we're trying to do.
Yes, sir.
Any additional questions from the members of the Housing Real Property Subcommittee before I go to the stakeholders? Hearing none, I see.
No, I tried to get, I have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't see you. Delegate Baker, I'm sorry, Delegate Baker.
Yeah, so if I have a lease, I enter into a lease agreement, 12-month lease. I need to increase my rent. You're telling me I can only increase it at 4% max?
No.
No.
So, sorry, Delegate Holman.
Go ahead, Matthew. Go ahead, Matthew.
But no, to be very clear, this doesn't put a cap on how much you
Gotcha,
can raise
okay.
rent.
So then my question is, based on this language, I'm going to have to let him know 9 months, if it's a 12-month lease, and I give him notice at 9 months into that lease, I'm giving him his 3 months notice. Or do I have to wait until the end of the lease to give him his 3 months notice of a rent increase?
It would be 3 months notice before the rent increase could go into effect.
Prior to the
So
end
if it
of-
were to, oh, sorry.
Yeah,
So
I
if
didn't
I
mean-
get, so I could provide the rate or the rate increase letter at 9 months into a 12-month lease. I don't have to
Yes,
wait to,
Yes.
or I can do it
If
at any
were-
time during the 12-month lease.
Well, if it's intended to go into effect, renew and go into effect on month 13, so the first month of
Correct.
the next 12-month period,
Okay, that's how I'm thinking.
you would, but by this, have to do it at month 9.
I could
If
do
it's
it at
a year
8
long.
and say I could do it at 6 months in and say that I'm going to increase.
Yes,
If you remain here at the expiration of the lease, this is how much your rent's going up.
that is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Good questions, Delegate Baker. Appreciate that. I'm sorry, I just couldn't see your hand. I'm sorry. Any additional discussions from the members of the Housing Real Property Subcommittee? And because I can't see all of you, if you have a question, just shout out or something. Okay, leave the screen up there, Matthew, if you don't
Okay.
mind.
Yep. Sure.
Seeing no additional questions from the members of the Housing Real Property, we're now going to take questions from the stakeholders. I see a hand raised by Ms. Graziano.
Yes, that's me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt, I just want to thank you for shooting this around prior to this evening's meeting, because I was able to get some first impression feedback from my members. And I think while we did, Delegate Araki is correct, we did initially in our testimony ask that the notice timeline be set at 60 days. I think we can live with 90 days. The one sticking point that remains based on what we have here is the method of notice. So the section, looking at line 18 on this first page where it says through first class mail, we would like to expand that a little bit or have a conversation about expanding that to include other digital means. A lot of our members communicate with their residents through their online portals or through email. We would also like notice to be able to be delivered that way.
So your suggestion is to have something in there relevant to a digital communication, some kind of way is what you're suggesting. Email or something.
It could be that specific or just something that, reasonably, what is the standard like notice requirement language, reasonably calculated to inform the person, right? But yes, that's the idea, is to have some mechanism that will allow for a digital service of notice.
And for those that are not aware, Ms. Graziano, tell everyone what organization you represent.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, I'm with the Maryland Multi-Housing Association.
Is there anything else you want to add?
Nope, that was really the one issue I wanted to highlight.
If you would do us a favor, please, and put something in writing to Matthew
Certainly.
with your suggestion, we certainly would appreciate it. Okay. Delegate Long, before I go to you, let me go to Public Justice Center, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt
Yes, sir.
Hill. Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we certainly can.
Great. Matt Hill at Public Justice Center. I think we would have some concerns about expanding this to digital notice or reasonably calculated notice in all circumstances. We just have a lot of vulnerable folks who aren't necessarily on email or accessing their tenant portal. And if that's presumed to be good notice, they're likely to suddenly find themselves facing a rent increase that they really didn't know was coming.
Point well taken, Mr. Hill. Maybe we could do something like I'm not quite sure what to do. I'm not going to make a suggestion at this point, but we do have your concern documented, Mr. Hill. And as I indicated at the top, right now we're in discussion of this bill and no votes taking place this evening anyway. So we'll try to, if you could, Mr. Hill, put something in writing to Matthew with your suggestion. That way we can compare Ms. Graziano and your concerns together, or perhaps the two of you could either talk together with each other. That probably would make it a lot easier on the HRP committee, if you don't mind.
Happy to have that conversation, but I don't have a suggestion for the language, and that my suggestion is to keep it as is. But
okay,
yes.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. I'm not going to go back. Are there any more any stakeholders that want to discuss anything before I go back to the HRP members? Hearing none, we're now going to go back to the members of the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee. And first question goes to Delegate Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Real quick, I just want to piggyback and just put out for the record, I think the internet may be an unreliable option. So I think that residents can be duped easily to find a much less colorful word. So I think the subcommittee should really look at perhaps providing an opt-out provision for those that want to do so, but that should certainly not be the only option. I'm vehemently opposed to that being the only option.
Thank you, Delegate Long.
Yes,
Well taken. I'm now going to go to Delegate Regina Boyce next.
Thank you. I was on the lines of Delegate Long to saying, could it be one, either an opt-in provision that is something you can opt into if you want, but it is not something mandatory for the landlord. And if the landlord or the housing provider decides that that is a provision that they would have to touch, they would have to do the electronic notice and potentially the mailing notice. So just for the reasons that Delegate Long mentioned, if something gets out of whack. I know in past messages, we talked about potentially using email or texting notifications, if that is, because so many people sometimes do pay their rent per, most housing providers now have like an app where you can go in, or a site where you can go in where you can actually pay the rent online. For some people, it's not an option. For all people, but again, it's one of those opt-in measures that there could be an opt-in, but not something that they would definitely have to take. If should they want it, they could do it, but it's not essentially mandatory.
Thank you, Delegate Boyce.
Thank you, sir.
Let me go now to Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much. I just want to endorse what the previous two delegates, Delegate Boyce, Delegate Long, said. I think that maybe having that opt-in option, and that's something that the landlord could negotiate or offer, as you know, instead of getting it posted on the property or delivered by the building manager or whatever, it could be done electronically if the tenant opts to accept that as,
Okay.
as a preference for them.
Sure, sure. Thank you, Delegate Healy. I see that Ms. Graziano has her hand raised. We'll go back to you again.
I do. I think Delegate Baker may have wanted to weigh in on something, though. I saw him waving in the camera, so I'm gonna
I'm
let
sorry.
him go first.
I can't see down that far. Delegate Baker, go ahead. I'm sorry, sir.
Beginning to think my wave, your definition of the wave is different than my wave.
Well, Delegate Baker, only because the shared screen doesn't allow
I
me
understand.
to.
I understand. For me to really be comfortable with all of this, there should be multiple ways that a landlord can reach out to the tenant to make sure that they know that there's a rent increase coming. Because I think we all know if the opportunity presents, the tenant, and both, I shouldn't say just the tenant, could deny or say they didn't receive or anything. But for me to be comfortable, I would think the landlord should have multiple ways of reaching out to the tenant to express the notice that there's going to be a rent increase. That's just my thought at this point in time. But
Thank you,
multiple.
sir.
You can't have too many ways to reach out to somebody to let them know that they're going to have an increase in rent.
Great. And I agree with you, Delegate Baker.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Now let's go back up to Ms. Graziano.
Thank you. So I was just going to say I'm grateful that the concept of an opt-in was brought up, and that did come up in our discussions. And I think we would be amenable to, and we can work out what the exact language would look like, but amenable to having some provision in there that states if the resident has agreed as a term of their lease to receive notice digitally, perhaps that could be how we resolve this.
Well,
Okay.
okay, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Graziano, you finished?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Delegate Healy?
Yeah, I would not want it to be put into the lease because that's like a take it or leave it. And I don't know that that's really, I think it should be a separate thing where they make an agreement, not actually in the terms of the lease that they sign so that they can live there.
Mhm. Okay. All right.
I
well,
just, maybe I was unclear. I just mean they would have the opportunity to opt in at the time that they sign their lease. Is
As
that
long as it's a free choice and it's not a condition of the,
no, it'd still be an
getting the
opt-in.
rent.
It would still be a choice.
okay.
Okay. All right. Any additional discussion on HB 151? And again, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your indulgence because I thought that there would be some lengthy discussions on this. I wanted to have just that, a discussion and not a vote. We will take all of your suggestions to heart and try to figure out a way to put all of this into bill language. And if there are no additional questions, we're going to move from HB 151 and go to the final bill of the day, which is HB 105. And HB 105 is going to be for discussion only as well. And HB 105, Matthew, if you could go through HB 105 so we can begin our discussions, overview of the bill, if you don't mind, Matthew.
Certainly. So the subcommittee members may remember that we touched on this bill previously quite briefly. I'm not sure necessarily where we ended the discussion last time, so I'll just start from the beginning. The bill would amend various provisions of the Maryland Condominium Act and the Maryland Homeowners Association Act relating to the governing body of a condominium or a homeowners association, respectively. So what I'll probably do, because there's such great parity between the provisions, is just show what the provision would look like for the Condominium Act and then explain how it may differ for for the homeowners association. However, everything's drafted so that it's consistent. What is done for a condominium should then be done for a homeowners association. That's the general goal as I read the bill. So the first provision, the first component would be, and I'm working off of the reprint that I sent out, which is, my apologies here. It's HB 105-343-729-1.
And the date on that, ladies and gentlemen, is March the 1st, 12:03 p.m.
Yes. So the first component would have to do with meetings and public meetings that would have to be held prior to the transfer to unit or lot owner control. So control of the board by the unit owners in a condominium or the lot owners in a homeowners association. And the big change would be that until the meeting is held that would require that transfer, the unit or lot owners, the board of directors or the developer would have to convene at least one meeting each year at which the agenda is open to any matter relating to the condominium and the unit owners have an opportunity to provide comment. This opportunity to provide comment language is also added to the annual meeting provisions that would take place after transfer to unit or lot owner control. So probably best way to handle the bill, since it's expansive, is just to go component by component and stop and ask if there's any questions about that first component we discussed. And I would note the amendment that I sent out is meant to maintain the intent of the bill as drafted. It's just the concern was the way that it had originally been drafted by removing governing body and referencing board of directors or the developer. If there were a degree of control by the governing body or some council of the governing body, you might lose the mandate to have an annual meeting. I think it was just maybe a drafting issue or oversight. What the amendment does is say the law as it exists currently stays the same, except now unit owners and lot owners would have the opportunity to provide comment at these meetings, and then adds a new provision specific to those meetings held prior to the transfer to unit or lot owner control, and specific to the board of directors or the developer of a condominium or the board of directors or declarant of a homeowners association.
All right, keep going, Matt. You're doing great.
Well, I guess if there's any questions on that specific provision, I'd be happy to take them now, or I can move on to component number 2.
Maybe that's probably a good idea, Matthew. Let's just go through them section by section. Any questions on this portion thus far, ladies and gentlemen? And again, if there are, I can only see a couple of heads. If you have questions, just shout out so I can identify you. Okay, seeing no questions, Matthew, let's go to the next portion if you don't mind. Thank you, sir. And go back to share. Yeah, thank you, sir.
Sure. So then the next component would be that within 30 days after the date on which a certain percentage of the unit or lots have been conveyed to members of the public for residential purposes, the developer of a condominium or the declarant of a homeowners association would have to appoint at least one member of the board or to the board of directors who is unaffiliated and a unit or lot owner. And by unaffiliated, that just means otherwise not affiliated with the developer of the condominium or declarant or vendor of the lots of a development within an HOA. Alternatively, there may not be a board that has been created at this point. So the requirement would be to establish a board and then add that one unaffiliated member. So I'll just scroll down now to the language as it pertains to condominiums. And if there are any questions, happy to address those.
And let me tell you how that generally happens, ladies and gentlemen. When a builder is constructing a subdivision, most of the times the builder is in control of just about, the builder is in control of everything. And sometimes they just don't have meetings with any of the lot or unit owners because it's all done in-house. But this provision would allow some discussion with the small number of unit owners or lot owners. That's what that's all about. You can go to the next section if you would, please, Matthew.
Sure. So the next provision, there we go, would require that within 15 days after transfer to unit or lot owner control, the developer or declarant, depending on if we're talking about a condominium or a homeowners association respectively, would have to deliver to each member of the board of directors who is an unaffiliated owner. So again, that person we're talking about kind of in the last section, any bond provided to, or sorry, not the bond itself, but notice of any bond provided to a governmental unit in connection with the development, and the name, address, and phone number of the governmental unit that serves as the bondholder. And then at least 30 days before the developer or declarant requests to be released from one of these bonds, the developer or declarant would be required to deliver to each member of the board of directors who is unaffiliated the intent to be released from the bond, and then the name, address, and phone number of the governmental unit that serves as the bondholder.
And
So
the governmental unit, let me explain how this works, ladies and gentlemen, in case someone's not really aware. When a construction takes place, there's a bond put in place for example, the roadway systems. The bond is an agreement between the developer and the local government. The board of directors has nothing to do with the bond in terms of the negotiations of it or the release of it. But I thought it would be a good idea to have those that are living in the community at least the opportunity to know when the bond is going to be released. That's why I put that in there. But I want to make it clear, the unit owners or the lot owners have no control over anything that takes place between the two people that are listed on the bond. All right, thank you, Matthew. Go to the next piece.
So the final major component of the bill for both condominiums and homeowners associations would be, and I apologize, I just have to, there we go. The bill would amend record keeping requirements for books and records to require that the record keeping begin on the date the council of unit owners in a condominium or the homeowners association is established, and that all books and records kept by the council of unit owners or the homeowners association be maintained separate and apart from those of the developer or the declarant or any other person. There is a specific provision that is applicable just to homeowners associations that require a copy of the fidelity insurance policy or fidelity bond to be included in the accounts kept and made available by or on behalf of the homeowners association. By specific, I mean this is just being added for the homeowners association. I believe it's to create parity with a similar provision in the condominium act.
Thank you, Matt. Now, that's the end of it, right, Matt?
Yes, the bill can be broken down just into those four main components.
What I'd like to do now is I want to go to the members of the HRP to see if there are any questions by members of the HRP. And again, this bill, just like the last one, is here for discussion purposes only. We're not voting on this today. So I want to go to the members of the Housing Real Property Subcommittee to see if anyone has any questions or concerns about the language thus far in HB 105. Okay, hearing none, what I'd like to do now is go to stakeholders and see if any of the stakeholders have any concerns about the language thus far in HB 105. Anyone?
Douglas Holmes, Bob Ensign, can you hear me? I think maybe on the iPad on there.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I represent the Maryland Building Industry Association, and we have been working with Delegate Holmes, looking at the language in it. And we've suggested some, I think, really what are technical changes to the 25% provision, and we're going to get language for everyone to look at to make that clear and to put it in accordance with other existing sections of the condo law. I did want to just comment briefly on the provision dealing with the bonds. First of all, the language says you have to deliver to each member of the board of directors. I don't know what that means. We have to hand deliver it to each member of the board of directors. And then if we can't hand deliver it to one of them, we're in violation. So I think that needs to be addressed. I think, yeah, to me, it just would seem the logical thing is if you have to give notice of this, that it should just go to the board, be addressed, to the board and sent by, by first class mail or however you want to do it. But I think is to say, quote, just to say, quote, deliver, unquote, so that each board member doesn't make sense. What happens, how are you going to deliver it? The second issue, we've expressed this with Delegate Holmes, and I think we agree to disagree on this, is this issue of the notice that just so you understand our position, the bond is between the governmental unit and the developer. That's what the bond is, and it's there for typically for improvements, maybe to the road entering the outside the entrance, say to the condominium property, and the developer has to put up a bond. They get it from a bonding company, and the bond is in favor of the governmental unit. It's not in favor of the owners. It's not in favor of the condo association. It's in favor of the governmental unit. The way the bill is drafted, you have to give them the name, address, and I think telephone number of the governmental unit. You have to send that to them at the beginning of the process, and at least I think 30 days before you're going to seek release of the bond. The same information. It just seems to me that if someone from the condominium property has a concern about the roadway outside, that's something for them to take up with their, with the local government. We just don't feel like it's appropriate that since the condo property is not a party to the bond, that we should have to require this notice. But and then we have more technical, I guess, concerns about how you would deliver it. Is it the name of the governmental unit, its address and phone number? I guess we'd have to check and make sure that we have that information, that we have the latest information, I guess. So those are just concerns that we have with that information. And I know Delegate Holmes feels differently than we do about it, but I thought since he asked us to address our concerns, I would speak up about it. Thank you.
Sure. And I do appreciate that, Mr. Hinton. And that's why I wanted to open this up for discussion. And let me, for the members of the HRP, Mr. Hinton is correct in that the bill does specifically state that the name, address, and phone number of the governmental unit that serves as the bond holder. And just as Mr. Hinton suggested, if someone living in the community had an issue with the roadways, for example, that were being constructed, all that person had to do was call the government. So what I'm saying in this bill is that I'm giving the board of directors directly whom to call at the governmental unit, so that if someone in the community has a concern, they know exactly to whom to call in the governmental unit. And I will express, and Mr. Hinton is correct, there is nothing contractual between, I'm back to it a different way. The only contractual arrangement of the bond is between the declarant and the government. But I just want to give an opportunity for the unit owners or the lot owners to have a discussion about this. Any other questions, any other concerns from the Housing and Real Property Subcommittees before I go to stakeholders? I don't see any hands raised. I see, now I'm going to go to the stakeholders. Ms. Jones?
Sure. Just very quickly, CAI supports the bill as introduced. And I think this is legislation that we've seen for a couple of years, and as was actually, as you know, Delegate Holmes was introduced with amendments that we had worked on, I guess, mixture of last year and a year before, that actually the builders were involved with when the bill moved, I think in 2021. So I think, I just want to just make it clear that the bill as introduced, we're comfortable with. And if there's any amendments that, or the amendments that Mr. Enton is referring to, if we can see them again, but we're likely to be where you are, Mr. Chair, on not being supportive of them, because this is a bill that we've worked on for a long time and we're comfortable with the way it was introduced.
Well, I do appreciate it. Once we receive amendments, it is my intention to make sure that amendments that are received will be distributed to everyone, because I want to make sure that everyone understands where we're coming from once we get this thing to the floor. I don't want to have a food fight on the floor. Any additional discussions from anyone, stakeholders or members of HRP? And Matthew, if you could remove the shared screen so I can see everyone. I see Karen Strawn. You're muted.
There we go. The Attorney
There you
General's
go.
office also would have concerns about the amendments that Bob Enton is proposing.
Okay. And again, I appreciate that, Ms. Strawn. And once we get amendments from Mr. Enton or anyone else, quite frankly, we will distribute the amendments to everyone just to make sure that everyone understands what our discussions are going to be about next week, I'm hopeful. Any additional discussion, Matthew, or anyone else on HB 105? Well, ladies, go ahead.
I just to clarify that the amendment I sent is one that I had identified as a technical amendment, and it would be separate from this other amendment that is being theorized. That's it.
Sure, we understand that. Thank you, Matthew. Ladies and gentlemen, you've gone through these bills, 6 bills in record time. It is only 8:03. So I suggest, since it's only 8:03, I'm going to add a couple more bills onto this agenda so we can stay here for another couple hours. What do you think? Is that okay?
No. No, I'm hungry.
Delegate Holmes, I'm in favor of that. Let's stay on all night.
I'm getting hangry. Chairman. Yeah,
Okay,
no, I'm not in
Bob and
favor of
Marvin
that.
can stay and the rest of us could go, I think. That's it.
Thank you,
Ladies and
Delegate.
gentlemen, I do appreciate you. I do appreciate you, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting is now adjourned. Take care now.
Thank you. Bye. Good night.